Linked on michaelsavage.com is an article from the American Thinker by a psychotherapist living in Berkeley who has recently become a conservative. After a lifetime of liberalism, she has written an article entitled Are Men Obsolete? And the author, Robin of Berkeley, joins us now. Robin, welcome to the Savage Nation.
Well, Michael, first let me say I am so thrilled to be on your show because you are a big reason of how I have woken up. I have always been a very far-left person. I grew up in New York with a dad who thought that liberals were great and conservatives were the devil. So I was brainwashed since childhood. And then I moved about 30 years ago to Berkeley. And so Berkeley is the center of the far left, as we all know. And so then I went very, very left in my politics and also started believing that conservatives were bad and liberals and the left were great. And I just sort of went along in my bubble for all these years. And I woke up last year, and as I say, Michael, you were a big part of it. For me, what had happened, looking back, I realized it's sort of like being in a marriage where I was very happy at first, and then I was disgruntled, but I didn't know why. And what happened for me specifically is that I was a supporter of Hillary, and then I could see how the left really went after her and vilified her. And this may sound odd, but I was shocked. I had no idea that my beloved leftist people would actually be so mean and so horrible and trash her like that. So something woke up for me. And also I was working with a client who was also being just terrorized at her job for the same reason, for supporting Hillary. So I realized that something was wrong on the left and that I had not seen it before. And I didn't know what it was, and I was completely confused. I didn't have any friends at all who were conservative. So out of desperation, I started looking around to try to get some answers. And I heard vaguely about talk radio. I just knew that there was something, so I scanned my dial. And, Michael, I found you. And here you were talking about Obama, and you were spot on. And I'd never heard a man like you in my life. And ordinarily, I would just have turned you off. But you were talking about Obama. You were spot on. And you were saying so many other things that, to me, were brilliant. And what I could tell about you right away as a therapist is that you have what I call a creep detector, a radar for creepy people and creepy situations, which is something that I have that not that many people have. I mean, I think we have it in childhood, and somehow that gets taken away from us as kids. And you were seeing right away that something was off. But what was so helpful to me is you were filling in the history. You were talking about socialism, and you were talking about philosophy and religion and spirituality, things I was interested in but didn't know that much about. And so you started filling in the information for me that I was missing, and I became glued to your show, listening and getting some more facts. And also going out and meeting some new people and reading. And I had to educate myself. I had to do my own little re-education camp just for myself because I'd always been so far left. I had to learn what has actually gone on with the left that I was completely ignorant about, and that how much of it is steeped in communism and steeped in anger and hate. And the other part of it, Michael, that you pointed out for me is about this idea of feminization. And that's what my article in American Thinker is about. When I first heard you talk about men being feminized, I had no idea what you were talking about. That was the strangest concept. Why should I, as somebody who has always been a feminist and concerned about victims, care about men? But the more I started listening, the more I started understanding what the left has done to men and how that has affected not just men, but all of us. Society, and what happens to a society if the men are no longer allowed to be men, if women are no longer allowed to be women. And I started rethinking everything. And that's been my experience for the last year, is rethinking everything. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, and something that I have always believed, a deeply believed, felt belief in anything. It could be abortion, it could be guns, it could be men, it could be absolutely anything. I start questioning everything that I'm believing. And one of them is about men and how feminization of men, as you've been talking about for so long, is not good for men and it's not good for society, especially given the threats that are out there with North Korea and Iran and China, that we need people to feel strong within themselves.
You use the term hungry ghosts in your explanation of how you were living your life. How do you suggest that we awaken these ghosts in others?
Well, that's a great question, and something I've been asking myself all the time. As a therapist, as somebody myself who has woken up, how can we do it? Because I think that it's absolutely crucial that people start waking up. And, Michael, so much of your show is saying every day, do you know what kind of danger you're all in? Do you know what is going on? I think as a therapist, however, I know that people cannot wake up until they are ready. And that's something that's always frustrating for me as a therapist when I see a client and they're doing things that aren't so good for themselves. And I can be fairly naggy in the effort of really trying to help them and care about them and say, doing this is not good for you, or drinking too much, using drugs, whatever is not good for you. But people have to sometimes, as they say, bottom out before they can actually see the truth. So it's very hard, and I don't think there's any way of snapping our fingers here. But one thing I've been trying to do out here is just to try to create a little bit of doubt in people and anxiety. So I'm probably not the most pleasant person walking around town right now. When I'm sort of bopping around Berkeley, and people say, "How are you?" And I'll say, "Oh, I'm okay, just sort of worried about what's going on in the world." And then the person will look at me, and they all of a sudden feel a little doubt or an anxiety. And they'll say, "Well, what do you mean?" And I'll say, "Well, say health care, that really concerns me." And I'll say why. And, "Oh, it just seems like there's so much control of us now going on with this more taxing. I'm just worried." And I talk about myself sort of just from this anxious place, and I look very reasonable, and I can see on people's faces that they start getting a little bit nervous too. So as I say, I'm not the most pleasant person right now to spend a little time with, but it seems to be helpful. And what I also will do is try to gear what I say to the particular person. So I know say if I have a friend or an acquaintance, and maybe they're very worried about money and taxes, so that I might give them a little information about, "Oh, it seems like we're going to have to pay more taxes now with this cap and trade. Have you heard about that?" And I'll gear it to them that way, just to have them get a little bit nervous and anxious. And I think that it's happening more and more, because what I'm noticing in Berkeley, which is encouraging, is that months ago, people were just so excited and pumped up about Obama. People were talking about him with starry eyes and excitement and listening to him on the radio. And I'm not hearing that anymore. It's very interesting. There's this silence all of a sudden. I don't hear anybody mention him. No one seems to be talking about him. And my guess and my hope is that people are starting to get a little worried, because oftentimes what happens is that people can feel nervous that something is going on, but they can't figure out exactly what it is. It's kind of like one of those situations where a neighbor is arrested for murder, and then they go ahead and they interview other neighbors, and people will say, he seemed nice, but there was just something about him that made me uncomfortable, or there was something about her that just didn't fit. And I think a lot of people are starting to just wonder and question and say, the pieces of the puzzle are just not lining up, but they don't know what it is. And so I think this is a really good time to help people to wake up. But as I say, I think it's going to have to be very slow and patient and meticulous.
Robin of Berkeley, thanks for being on the Savage Nation.
Michael, it's been my pleasure, and I want to thank you so much for all that you do for us, and for me in particular, because you have educated me so much. I feel like I have been taking this class for the last year. Every day I tune in. Every day I listen to you, and I learn something else, whether it's about religion or philosophy. I love the quotes that you give us from the Bible, from great literature. It's made me much hungrier to learn more about history and religion. I bought my first Bible and here I am in my 50s. I'm starting to read that. I feel so hungry to learn, and I appreciate so much that you offer me and so many of your listeners the information that so much of us are lacking that we didn't get in the schools. And certainly for me, as somebody who's been a member of the left, I didn't know any of this. So thank you so much for having me on today and for all you do for us.
I'm going to talk about these and other topics even if the rest of the media refuses to. This is the Savage Nation. Savage.